human rights in China. They've come into the spotlight once again following the escape of the man they call the blind lawyer. That's Chen Guangcheng. He managed to give security guards the slip and get himself to US diplomatic protection in Beijing, where he still is. All of this, of course, just days before Hillary Clinton and co arrived for a key summit on the economy and on security. Just to remind you of our panel tonight, Jean-François Demeliot is the founder of the Asia Centre here in Paris. Emmanuel Lancourt is the editor-in-chief of Monde Chinois, that's Chinese World. And in London tonight, Martin Jacques has written a book and it's called When China Rules the World. Many thanks indeed. Now, Jean-François, we were just having a chat there in the break, weren't we, about what Martin Jacques was saying about an attitude in the West. He believes that the West looks down on China in terms of human rights. What are your thoughts on that?
Three things come to my mind when we're talking about this. Obviously, when you go to the US and you're a foreigner, you can probably doubt the value of human rights in the US, because when you cross the border in the US and you see immigration officers, well, you could say, well, it's the land of human rights and so on. But this is very superficial. The second thing I would like to say that when you speak to Chinese people, they look down at us on many things, especially since the financial crisis, and they consider our governments did not manage the financial crisis well. And I'm talking of the Chinese people.
In particular debt, because they have a different way of handling money.
Absolutely, but there is one thing Chinese people do not look down at us and envy us for, is our freedom of movement, the way we can move around in our country, across countries, across continents. And of course, the third thing I would like to say, of course, when you're a Chinese ruler, even though deep in your mind, maybe you can adhere to the human rights conception, you have a huge country to rule. And it's very difficult to juggle with all the issues that you've got to juggle with, especially currently. There is a deep political crisis in China currently. So that makes the human rights issue even more difficult to deal with. But it would be wrong to say that West and China have different views on what people really want. Basically, every man and woman on earth want freedom, liberty of movement, and pursuit of happiness, as the US Constitution would say.
All right, now we've talked a lot about Chen Guangcheng. Let's talk about some of the other Chinese dissidents who have, as you say, been fighting for the freedoms you were just talking about, Jean-François. I think we can bring up a graphic for you. We can have a look at some of them. This is Liu Xiaobo. He's 54 years old. He was a key leader in the Tiananmen Square protest back in 1989. He was jailed for 11 years for a crime called in China inciting subversion. This basically after he drafted a document, Charter 8, which calls for multi-party democracy in China. Another one is Hu Jia. Now, he's very close to Chen Guangcheng. He himself was arrested over the past 24 hours there. You can see him pictured with Chen there. Another one who was jailed for inciting subversion. He got 3.5 years for criticising the Chinese political system. And this is the woman they call Grandma Gao. She's in her 80s. She currently lives in exile in New York. She criticised the government over its handling of the so-called blood-selling epidemic of the 1990s. She's a doctor, and she says that contributed to AIDS. Now, I've just read out 3 here, Emmanuel, but there are many stories like this, aren't they? And with the social media and the internet as it is today, we all know about it.
Yes, well, it's not very new, but we all know about Ai Weiwei's affair, also the famous Chinese artist with dissidents, also Hu Jia, as you were saying, and so many others. What is new, I think, maybe is to make a link between Bo Xilai affair and this affair.
This is what happened in February.
Yeah, in February.
Let's just remind viewers what happened. So it was a police chief who sought help from the United States in China.
Wang Lijun, who was a close supporter and friend of the former Bo Xilai. Bo Xilai was a former mayor of Chongqing, which is the biggest city in China and in the world. And in these 2 cases, the Americans became the correspondent. In these 2 affairs, the Americans become...
They become the middleman, so to speak.
The middleman, yes. So this is
But
very
don't-
interesting
in-
and very embarrassing also, I think, for the American diplomacy at the very moment, because these two affairs are not so important. I think, especially Chen Guangchang's affair. I mean, it's not going to change the relationships between China and the U.S. Maybe it's a pretext also for Obama and its administration, because they are preparing the elections to be more concerned about the human rights. But I don't really think that it is a crucial affair.
Well-
to me, those two events are quite different. If I may disagree slightly, and there are two levels probably of interaction between US and China on those. I totally agree that on this current affair, it's an embarrassment. It comes at the wrong time. It creates difficulties when there are very, very serious issues between US and China. And I repeat myself, sorry, in the region, basically. The burning issues used to be monetary and economic. Now it turns to be the regional issues and the diplomatic issues. And the balance of power.
North Korea and Philippines.
Korea, Iran,
In
Syria, lots of issues. So this is basically the most burning item on the agenda. But in terms of Chongqing and Chengdu, the first difference is that it's not at all related to human rights. The second thing is that the police chief remained in the consulate for a few hours and was released and went out, which
he left voluntarily, apparently.
Exactly, superficially can be
disappeared.
seen as a cooperation between US and China. But obviously what concerns China very much is what did he leave at the US consulate. And this is much more important than what can a dissident say during his stay at a consulate, and what can be the consequence of a dissident stay at the embassy in Beijing. I think there is an underlying problem between US and China related to the Boxilai issue, not mentioning about the magnitude of the Boxilai consequences in the whole landscape of
Which is,
Chinese.
of course, why we've heard nothing from either government on either issue, have we? Martin, perhaps you'd like to come back to the conversation. What I find interesting about Chen is that he really wants to stay in China. He says that even if he is granted asylum, he doesn't want to take it. He genuinely believes that China can reform and will one day allow freedom of political expression. Is he being naive?
No, I don't think he is. I mean, if that's what he really thinks, then probably what he's hoping for is that, and he's made an appeal to Wen Jiabao and so on, he's been under house arrest not for years, as you said earlier, but actually for a year, and he wants his freedom back to be able to operate as he was before. And maybe, I mean, that it seems to me that would actually be a rather good solution to the question, which would meet his desires and would put China in a good or a better light. But I just want to take issue with what Jean-François said earlier on when he said, well, everyone all over the world wants the same thing. I don't know what this means. It's so abstract. But when you say, well, what freedom, freedom of movement and so on, well, take the issue of political governance. I mean, it is just not true that the Chinese people have the same view of governance as we do. We might think they're wrong, but they definitely don't share our view. I mean, and by that I mean there is the question of universal suffrage and a multi-party system. Ranks extremely low in the priorities of the Chinese people. If you look at, for example, Pew polls or the research by Tony Sage at Kennedy School at Harvard, the levels of satisfaction with the Chinese government amongst the Chinese populace hugely exceed those in the West. I mean, they rank around 80%. So, and the reason, quite frankly, is simple, which is, twofold. One, historically, the state is extremely important in China, and there's a sort of a deep sense of respect and deference towards it. And secondly, because the Chinese government over the last 30 years has been extraordinarily successful as the architect of economic transformation, a situation which one must say contrasts deeply with the situation in the West, where we've careered into disaster both in Europe and the United States.
Would you like to respond to that,
I would not.
Jean-François?
I would not really have a debate on whether Chinese or Western statistics are accurately wrong or precisely vague. But such numbers coming from, what is it, a poll? What is it, a research? What kind of research is it when you have more than 50%?
Well, there's plenty of evidence. There's been plenty of evidence.
Well,
it's not just that.
Yes,
It's
there
the
are plenty
Pew poll.
of evidence.
There's plenty of evidence that the Chinese people, for example, on the question of the competence of government, their feeling of well-being, economic well-being, their sense of prospects.
No one question. No one question
Pew
that.
polls show that the level of satisfaction amongst the Chinese is much higher than it's been in the West.
All right,
I do not challenge that, Martin. What I'm just saying is we should not, and read my lips, this is exactly what I said in the first part of the debate. There is no reason to downplay the will of Chinese people to enjoy more liberty of movements, even though they already enjoy more than they did in the past. This is exactly what I said. And this is nothing to do with the governance of China, which I would globally agree with you that people are satisfied with, or could be more satisfied, of course, and are more satisfied than Western people. But of course, this can always be improved. You cannot take a statistics as right, as accurate, or as inaccurate as it can be, as just a blank check to what's happening in China.
Martin.
Well, by and large, we seem to agree on this question.
Are you saying, Martin?
I take that.
Are you saying that there's a fundamental cultural difference between Westerners and Chinese in that they are not, they do not prioritise freedom of expression, political freedoms, etc., as highly as we do?
Yeah, there are all sorts of fundamental differences. One of the problems we have in the West is the view that we can understand and interpret Chinese society through a Western prism, as if it's like a Western society, and it is not like a Western society. Historically, China and culturally, China has evolved very, very differently. For example, it's not really fundamentally a nation state, it's a civilization state. And there are many differences. The relationship between state and society is very different in China, not just now, but historically. It's a result of evolution. It's not just to do with the communist regime.
But people might have said that about people might have said that about some countries in the Middle East until recently, when they rose up and overthrew their dictators. I mean, that must be something China was watching very nervously.
Well, no, this is. I mean, it's just, the Middle East. I mean, take the question of Egypt, which you've just thrown in that example, and China. They're chalk and cheese. I mean, the levels of satisfaction amongst the Egyptians with their government in terms of their economic condition and so on were extremely low. The Chinese are the opposite end of the spectrum. So it doesn't help to, compare, apples and oranges.
Would you like to come in there, Emmanuel?
There are many contradictions in China, and we can't say that all the population adhere to the economical reforms indeed, because if you take the example of Wuhan riots last December, there were thousand people using internet and Twitter also to protest against the local government. So it's very, very difficult to have a general position about what is China today. What is true, I would say, is that Chen Guangcheng's affair reveals the fact that any kind of Chinese dissidents, even Wang Lijun, who belonged to the Communist Party and blah, 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 always ask the Americans to interfere in the Chinese affair and to give their own opinion on the Chinese affair. So it proves also that the Chinese society has its own weakness, and especially the Communist Party indeed.
Martin, is it not the case that the Chinese system is just a more effective tool of repression than perhaps some others?
Well, that could be regarded as an extremely stilted question. I mean, the thing is that the fact is that China's been enormously successful over the last 30 years. Are we arguing about that?
Economically, no.
This has been, well, I mean, it has enormous political consequences. You can't just bottle it up as economic and say it doesn't have any consequences. If the French government is presiding over an economic stagnation and decline, that has enormous political consequences, and the same in China. If the French government had presided the last 5 years at 10% growth a year, then the French population will feel very differently about the present president. It has political consequences. And so, and there's no question at all that well, I would argue that probably in the modern economic history since the British Industrial Revolution, the Chinese government has presided over the most remarkable economic transformation in history.
So if people have enough money in their pockets...
And that has inevitably profound political and ideological consequences.
So what you're saying is if people have enough money in their pockets, they will be happy to live with whatever political system is imposed upon them?
Well, that's a very simplistic way of putting it, because economic transformation is not simply about that. It's about urbanization. It's about profound changes in culture and cultural opportunity. It enables enormous access to higher education. It enables a country to begin to have cultural industries and sporting events which previously they weren't able to have. Of course, it's a much wider transformation than reducing it to how many renminbi you've got in your pocket.
So in your view, can the current system survive as it is indefinitely?
Well, nothing is indefinite. Nothing is forever. And so the answer to that question is no. If you're asking me a different and I think much more pertinent question, which is the Chinese government in a position of vulnerability? Are we likely to see some kind of, political crisis which results in profound change? No, I don't think so. I think that this interpretation, which is persistent in the West, which is that, the Chinese government is in a position of weakness and so on, is wrong.
It
is wrong because it misreads the situation in China. What we're engaging in, those who think like this, is wishful thinking.
All right, Martin.
No, I think should we have this debate 1 year ago, I would have been very close to agreeing with you, Martin. Now we have this situation which unraveled with the passing over of the power from this generation to the next one, and this makes things difficult. Nothing is, as badly expected by the rulers as any kind of trouble. Unfortunately, some trouble arrived, and that's nothing to do with the dissidents, nothing to do with the US. It's internal trouble, and this has to be dealt with.
All right.
So I think this is a concern for the rulers.
Jean-François, I'll have to end it there. Jean-François Dumelia, Emmanuel Lancourt, and Martin Jacques in London, thanks very much indeed to you all. Thanks to you for watching. That's it for the debate. François, back with you tomorrow. Thanks for watching.